Questions in relation to Iraq.
How did your support for the war in Iraq begin? And do you now consider the war that you've supported a success?
Okay. A theme of my book, which I had thought at one point of calling Both Sides Now, is the operations of the dialectic and the way I could, as it operates in society and internationally and in the economy and so on, and also in my own cortex. So the one reason why I supported intervention in Iraq was because of my long history of opposition to it. I've been going to Iraq since the mid-1970s, since just before the time, in fact, when Saddam Hussein managed to get all power in his own hands. And I'd seen the steady evolution of the country into a one-man show run by a psychopathic crime family, as I've already said, with aggressive designs on its neighbours, committing genocide within its own borders, using weapons of mass destruction both inside and outside its borders, and borrowing from the worst of both fascism and Stalinism in its ideology. And I realized that the anti-war position, the position of containment of this regime, was based on a false premise, which was that this psycho leader understood self-preservation and understood deterrence and containment and sanctions and so forth. That's absolutely not true. Whenever he can, he makes the most insane possible decision. And this is very terrifying. It's not unlike the dealings we're currently having with both North Korea and Iran. You cannot be certain, indeed you have every reason to doubt, that unlike as with, say, the Soviet communists, that these people have any concept of rational self-interest. They may even indeed be suicidal. So there's no possibility of relaxation while they're around. You can't sleep, and there's no possibility of coexistence. Ultimately, I believe our civilization's existence is incompatible with neurotic expansionists, latently and blatantly aggressive, xenophobic and theocratic regimes. So, and I give a whole chapter to showing exactly how my mind changed. It's not about what I think, it's about how I think, which I hope is more interesting. And if you buy it, I'll sign it. And as for now, in 2003, Saddam Hussein organized a referendum in his own favor, in which for the first time in Iraq, and I think in the first time in recorded history, a turnout of 100% was claimed, as well as a recorded vote for the only candidate named. Never been done before, with people forced to jump up and down, ululating and cutting their wrists to write their ballot papers in blood and shouting for jihad and martyrdom and self-sacrifice. An unbelievably horrifying business, presided over by the dictator and his two sons, the voluptuously sadistic and deranged Uday and Qusay, whose succession was the thing we'd be living through now if we'd allowed the chance to occur. Now, the president of Iraq is Jalal Talabani, who I met when he was the leader of a gassed and murdered and dispersed Kurdish people, the guerrilla socialist leader in the mountains in 1991, the first ever elected president of Iraq. His party is the corresponding party of the Socialist International. His people, the Kurds, have an autonomous zone protected and self-governing in the northeastern provinces of the country. There's a written constitution, there's a parliament, there's a court of appeal, a free press, regular elections. I know a lot of people think that it would have been better if we'd left Saddam Hussein alone, but I can't be of that party. I'm terribly sorry. I think this is an improvement.
For your answer.
You make the case passionately for the invasion of Iraq. What
intervention?
Intervention in Iraq. Liberation, sure. Do you not think that it should follow that America should intervene in all situations where the values of liberal democracies are being undermined? Or what's the tipping point for you?
Well, first, the United States and its coalition allies are in Iraq still under a United Nations mandate to reconstruct the country. So it's not a unilateral intervention, and in my opinion, there was no need for a second resolution for the intervention after the Security Council had voted 9-0 to say that Saddam Hussein must either come into compliance or face grave consequences, and the certainty is he never came into compliance. Iraq is now in compliance with the resolutions on weapons of mass destruction and has been inspected and now can be said to be free of them, but it couldn't have been said to be that before unless you're willing to take on trust Saddam's regime itself, which I wouldn't recommend. I don't think after its record it was entitled to the smallest scintilla of the presumption of innocence. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what do you have to do if you're a state to sacrifice your sovereignty? How far do you have to go? Well, there are 4 possible conditions. One is you invade and occupy the territory of neighboring countries. The second is if you violate the Genocide Convention, which mandates, by the way, if it's broken, it mandates action by all its signatory powers. If you can't, either to prevent or if you can't prevent, to punish the genocide. The third is fooling around with the Non-Proliferation Treaty and trying to acquire illegal or use illegal weapons of mass destruction. And the fourth is giving aid and comfort to international terrorist organizations as designated. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, multiply guilty on all 4 fronts several times. And its sovereignty gone. It was under a UN-imposed sanctions regime. Most of its airspace was patrolled by foreign aircraft to protect its people from a renewal of genocide. It was a matter of how long it could stay half slave and half free. I think that question was resolved the right way. Now, I don't know of any other regime that qualifies to have lost its sovereignty in quite that way. Robert Mugabe did send some mad troops into the crazy war in the Congo, but you can't say he invaded or occupied a neighboring country. He doesn't have any weapons of mass destruction. He doesn't give sanction and cover to international terrorist groups. And even though his policy of food denial to areas of the country that don't support him is certainly criminal, I don't know if it would quite raise to the level of the Genocide Convention.
And would you make the same argument about North Korea?
North Korea is openly in breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Not that it's ever signed it, but I mean, in the principles of same. Its starvation of its people to a point where they're 6 inches shorter than South Koreans. That's a lot of starving and stunting people down to that extent. It's a terrifying commitment to keeping your people hungry. And it's a good question as to whether you can commit genocide against your own people. I certainly think it's worth discussing. Undoubtedly supports international terrorists and gangster groups, without any question, as it does narcotics smuggling, currency forgery, and all manner of other outlaw things. I think that certainly there's an absolute case for removing the Kim Jong-il regime, but we are subject to its nuclear blackmail. We are as much hostages to it as its starving slaves are. But on principle, of course, yes. They're looking for a war with us, and they will probably, I think, have one. I think we should pick the time and the place of it and not them. Totalitarian regimes are incompatible with our existence. That will be found out however much we wish it wasn't true, it is true. It will be discovered. It will be forced upon us, that awareness, if we don't develop it for ourselves.
I won't pursue that. I'll give the microphone number 2 the chance to ask a question. Fun, though, discussing Iraq is. You can't turn it into a filthy limerick, can you, Christopher? So, number 2.
It's a question on American domestic politics. Would you explain why it seems to me that the less well-off Americans on both the Democratic side and the Republican side, a significant percentage of them seem to resent some of the bills which Obama is trying to pass, which would apparently do them the most use? Perhaps the health bill, perhaps the financial services bill. They seem to resent it in a way that you might not expect.
Yeah, I did. There is among a lot of Americans, including those who don't have any property and don't have any security of employment or income, there is a powerful resistance to state influence. It comes, I think, partly from the frontier. It comes in part from a sort of Calvinism that's quite strong among old pioneers. It's been handed down. It comes also, of course, as a legacy of the Civil War. But there are many people who would say, if you let me keep my gun and you stay out of my church, I don't want any more help from you, thanks. I'd rather live as if the government wasn't there. That's the point of being an American. I don't want to hear from Washington. It's my right to live in this part of Kansas unmolested. This is paradoxically very beautifully expressed by a Tea Party rally, a placard that I'm sure some of you saw recently saying, keep the government's cotton-picking hands off my Medicare. Because they've forgotten where Medicare came from. They thought it was a right that they had to defend from Washington.
It's not one of Jefferson's, I don't think.
No, that isn't. I think Mr. Jefferson would have had a slightly finer line on a thing like that. But that is the mentality, and that's also, of course, the irony of it. I deep down think Americans don't really want health care. They certainly don't want it if they have to pay for anyone else to have it. They think life should be risky. They think you should be taking your chances. They look down on countries where the government tries to make sure that everyone's life works out.
So what do you make of the Tea Party movement, and are you concerned by the tenor of the kind of groundswell of American politics at the moment? Do you think it's dangerous?
Well, my new line on this, which I've tried out on a few people already, is the Tea Party movement proves that all politics is yokel. I went to one of their big rallies on Capitol Hill the other day. I took my daughter, and in front of me there was standing in front of us there was standing a guy who said, "We didn't bring our guns," and then on the other side said, "This time." And then one said, I'm defending the First Amendment today, but I'll be defending the Second Amendment tomorrow. And that's the gun amendment. And I thought, ooh, I'm really scared now. It seemed pathetic to me, actually. There was a note of desperation to it, and pathos, I thought. These are people who, in part, they don't recognize the country they used to grow up in. Small town, church, monochrome. They feel it changing, they feel powerless to affect it, but they're absolutely powerless to change it back. It's not going to change back. There's something plaintive about it. And of course they don't want to sound like a snob. Oh, what the hell.
It's a bit late.
A lot of them are saps, is what I have to say. I mean, anyone who thinks that Sarah Palin isn't just cashing out on this and is going to make a few $1 million on her book and then leave them flat is a fool. She's obviously, classically, hollow, heartless opportunist, the shallowest kind. And she's going to leave them in the lurch once she's cashed out. And she seems to be the one who is their Pasionaria or their Joan of Arc. Well, this is no good.
That was about...
Were you yawning?
Not at all. No. I was segueing.
I thought you were stifling something. How am I supposed to feel?
No, we were talking...
Are we boring you? No.
I thought we might move from American domestic politics to British politics, and I thought I'd begin by asking you to compare the current Tory Prime Minister to a former Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, and perhaps you can tell us your view of the two of them.
I don't know anything about Mr. Cameron, and I shouldn't pretend that I do. Anyone who wants an illuminating discussion about British politics this month shouldn't be asking me, sorry.
All right.
Whereof, I'd like to assure you of this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, where I don't know what I'm talking about, I try and shut the hell up. I can tell you about having a physical encounter with Mrs. Thatcher.
Well, that's where I thought we might lead to, just to kind of round things up. We could finish on Iraq, but I thought...
That would be dragging things back to my memoirs, but that's what I'm here for.
Well, so one of the women you do talk about sexually,
yes,
is Mrs. Thatcher.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you convince us that it's anything other than a ooh?
I went to see her speak just as she'd become the leader of the opposition. It must have been 78 or 77, I suppose. And everyone, you can look it up, everyone in the press in those days, the Tory press too, which was still pro-Edward Heath, was saying, this is a spasm on the part of the Tories. This is a shrill suburban housewife, unelectably right-wing, ignorant, provincial, and so on. It's amazing to go back and look at this. I thought, I don't think this is true at all. I've just seen her speak to the party conference. She's got some of the most perfect skin I've almost ever seen on a human being. Unbelievably lovely eyes, and a roll of the hip that would,
But would it?
Yeah. And so I wrote this in the New Statesman, saying I thought she had a sexual hold on her party. Now, I've had a lot of rough mail in my life. The worst, how could you possibly mail I've ever had was about that. But I thought, no, I'm sure I'm right. And so I went to a reception in the House of Lords where I knew she was going to be, thinking, I'm going to follow up on this. And we were introduced by Peregrine Worsthorne. And I thought she recognized the name, because I think if you're the leader of the Tory party and a young man, then rather a handsome young mammal, working for the leading socialist opposition paper, says he thinks you're sexy, it's possible you remember his name. Anyway, it seemed to me that she did. So we got into a fight about Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, where I was right on the point of fact and she was wrong, but where she stuck up for her position so well that in the end I thought, it's not that big a point. I said, well, no doubt there's much in what you say, ma'am, and I bowed as if to acknowledge that we could move on. And she said, no, bow lower. And I felt all volition leaving me. And I bowed further and straightened up again, began to say, no, much lower. Till I was bent right over, and she'd been rolling up the order of the day, the parliamentary order paper, behind her back into a tube, stepped round behind me, smacked me on the bum. And I regained the vertical with some difficulty. And she walked away and over her shoulder said, naughty boy. I thought I was going to come in my pants. Anyway, as I trudged back home over Westminster Bridge, I thought, this woman has really got something. She's got real charisma. And, well, you laugh. But every single male opponent of hers in the old Tory establishment was within a couple of years completely taken off the chessboard and put back in the box without compunction, and on their part without resistance. They could do nothing to stop. She magnetized them, she hypnotized them, she had them under her spell, and I think I was very lucky to get an early glimpse of this, and it's in my book, and if you buy it, I'll sign it.
Did you meet her many times other than that?
Occasionally, a car would draw up with no license plates outside my apartment.
And you assumed the position.
And the curtains drawn, and a chauffeur would But it doesn't do to bandy a lady's name too much.
We have time for one more question. I do apologise to those who've been waiting at the microphones, but I will go to microphone 3.
No, if you have, but if you had to give up one, which passport would it be, the British or the American?
If you had to give up one passport, which would it be?
That's a waste of a question.
Pass, okay, well. I would like you to give us one and your dirtiest limerick to conclude, if possible.
They tend to be clerical, the really dirty ones. There was a young fellow of kings whose mind was upon higher things, but his real desire was a boy in the choir with an ass like a jelly on springs. That's not very dirty, though, but it gives you an idea. It's a curtain raiser for the anti-clerical. The Bishop of Central Japan used to roger himself with a fan. And when taxed with these acts, he replied, it contracts and expands, rather more than a man. But you see, you can do it with almost no dirty words. That's the key thing, I think, is to keep it filthy but not smutty. A vice both obscene and unsavoury holds the Bishop of Barking in slavery. With lascivious howls he deflowers young owls that he lures to an underground aviary. And, okay, you want one dirty one then. Because these are suggestive, shall we say, but not it is said of the Bishop of Birmingham that he fucks little boys while confirming them. They kneel on their hassock, he lifts up his cassock and pumps his episcopal sperm in them. That's quite dirty, isn't it?
And on that note...
But very contemporary, I think you're...
Indeed,
very contemporary,
indeed.
I think you'll agree. As the new Elton John song for the Vatican now goes, "Don't let your sun go down on me."
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's absolutely no doubt that Australia loves Christopher Hitchens. It's wonderful to have you here.
Love him back.
Hitch 22 is the book. It will be signed in the foyer afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.